Hi, I'm Pamela, and welcome to Greenstick Cottage, where I read and listen to books whenever the cats allow me to. I am going to talk about, I've had six, let me double check that. I'm pretty sure it's six recent finishes. One of those is not technically a book, but books adjacent podcast, so I'll start with that. That was season 1 of Murder Book, which is a true crime podcast hosted by Michael Connelly, who writes the Harry Bosch novels. So that was a very good season. It covered one case from beginning to end. They were able to record the trial, the entire trial, and even in chambers type discussions between the judge and the prosecuting attorney and the defense attorney, and they were able to interview one jury member after the trial. And so it was and I say it's books adjacent because not only is Michael Connelly a prolific successful writer of crime novels, but he talks about, during the podcast, he talks about his inspiration for characters in his books, and you can tell that some of the police detectives that are that speak on the podcast are consulting, people that Connelly has consulted to learn, and also he himself has a background as a journalist who covered the crime beat, and that's why he seems so familiar with the how the police department works, especially LAPD, because that's where he did a lot of his journalism. So it's very interesting. I really enjoyed it, and I'm now listening to season 2, which covers a serial killer case. So that one is also very interesting. And so the books I finished were Mockingjay, and that one is the last book in the Hunger Games trilogy. And I had read that trilogy in the past, but I went through it again because of listening to The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which is a prequel to the Hunger Games trilogy. So I figured I would just go right ahead and listen to it again and get more familiarized with and see what carryovers I could see from the prequel into the next 3 books. And I did see some of that, and but there's a huge gap, and I'm wondering if Suzanne Collins is going to write more books in between Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes and the Hunger Games. That would be interesting if she does. I don't really keep up with buzz about things like that, so if anybody knows, let me know. I would have to give Mockingjay, because by the 3rd book, Katniss is not my favorite character, so thank goodness there are plenty of other characters I like in the series, and so she got tiresome by the 3rd book, but I would still say the series overall is 4 stars. I enjoyed the series overall. Okay, next I finished Still Life and Fatal Grace by Louise Penny, which are the first 2 books in the Chief Inspector Gamache series, who is a homicide detective in Quebec, and I think he's based out of Montreal. And I read Still Life for the Janelle-a-thon, where we were reading books by that Janelle, her channel Too Fond of Books. She recently died, and so this event was started to read books that she liked. And I remember her talking about the Gamache series, and I always wanted to try it, so I did. And so after I finished Still Life, I went right on to A Fatal Grace. And they both feature a small village called Three Pines, which I think is outside of Montreal. And I found the dynamics between the English and the French in that part of the world interesting, the cultures, the different cultures, and I like the whole small town feel of it. It reminds me of Cozy Mysteries, which I love. And he and his assistants spend a lot of time in this village, and you get to know a lot of the people who live there and the characters. And this took place in both books, and so in the second book it was really nice to, I didn't expect it to go back to the same village, and so I was pleasantly surprised by that, and how they spent a lot of time there, and in both cases solving they involved murders, and so it solved that. My only disappointment in A Fatal Grace, the second book, was that I knew right away who the killer was, really, almost right when, that one actually has two murders in it, but with one of the murders I knew right away, but it took it till the end of the book for it to be revealed and to confirm that I was right. That still didn't detract. I mean, I love mysteries where I can't figure it out. When I don't figure it out, I get all the way to the end of the book and I had no idea. Those are like my favorites, I think, just because it stumps me and I'm hooked on it until I do find out who did it. So, but this series has so many nice things to it, and interesting, and some of the personal dynamics between characters, that knowing who one of the murderers was didn't totally take away from that. So definitely 4 stars for both of those books. The next one I finished was Northanger Abbey for Jane Austen July, and so I listened to that while I was working on my Lizzie blanket. I won't drag that out because I've talked about it before, and so that was what I got to do, listen to Northanger Abbey while I was crocheting. And so I liked Northanger Abbey. It was almost like 2 different books. This was my second time through that book, and I really noticed it more this time around, how it just kind of abruptly changes. And maybe it was just I listened to a different narrator, and so I don't know. It was a different edition that I listened to, so I'm not sure, but I still enjoyed it, and revisiting it was just fine. So yeah, I would. It's not my favorite Jane Austen novel, but I go so long. It's like reading it afresh each time I read one of her novels, because I guess I go long enough in between that it seems new to me again. So it's kind of hard to compare and give stars, but definitely I would put 4 stars on it because I liked it a lot. So that's good. And then another book I finished was Angel's Flight, which is the 6th book in the Harry Bosch series by Michael Connelly. And I did not like this one as much as the previous books in the series. I'm actually reading Michael Connelly's books in publication order, regardless of whether they feature Bosch or a different main character. So I think I liked all the books prior to this one better than Angel's Flight. So not just the Bosch books, but the other ones. I think there's a couple other ones. McCaleb and the Poet. Was that McCaleb? I can't remember right now. But yeah, this one kind of, I remember thinking about maybe a fourth of the way in, thinking, I sure hope he doesn't jump the shark. Now, some of you know where that phrase comes from, because to me, that's what it is when I'm just loving a series and then it just goes, and it's just like, please don't jump the shark. Please don't jump the shark. And because I've gotten so much enjoyment out of Connelly's books. So it did not jump the shark. It got better. And I still don't think it was good as the previous ones, but it did get better. And I did not figure, that's one of my favorite things about Connelly's writing, is I haven't yet figured out who done it until he completely reveals it. I might have some, slight suspicions, but I don't have a real solid certainty like I did in the second Gamache book. So anyway, so I'm going to continue. And in fact, I got the next book in publication order by Michael Connelly is Void Moon. And that I had that one on hold on Libby, and that came through, so I'll be starting that one today. And that features Cassie Black. I have no idea who that is until I get into the book, so we'll find out. And so I think I've talked about, all 6 of those. So I'll just talk about what I'm currently reading. And Angel's Flight, definitely 4 stars still. It may be on the lower end of the 4 stars, but 4-star rating. But anyway, okay, so I'm going to start with what I am consuming on the laptop. Now, I already talked about Murder Book Season 2. I definitely, if you're at all into true crime, you will probably like these podcasts. And I only have access to 2 of them, and Season 1 and Season 2 of this series. So I don't know if there are any more after that or if that's all there was, but that's what's on Audible. And I'm also reading the Juvenilia by Jane Austen for Jane Austen July, and I am following the links on the announcement video by Katie at Books and Things. And so far there's been like one every day since the 10th or 11th, ever since I finished Northanger Abbey. I'm not thrilled with Juvenilia. It's weird. It's just I'm just finding them. I understand she wrote these as, maybe a adolescent and, maybe even preteen. I'm not sure, but they're kind of clever sometimes, but most of the time I just feel kind of cringy and weird. And what was that? Now, I liked the most recent one was a poem, and I did like that. So, but I think to complete my education and enjoyment of Jane Austen, I need to read everything. So certainly everything she wrote. And I did enjoy the biography by her nephew that I read one year during Jane Austen July. So I'm trying to branch out a little bit, and so so that's what I'm consuming on the laptop. On my Blackfire, what's on the Blackfire? My Fire tablet. This is where Audible resides, and Audible. I wish Audible would take some lessons from Libby and create a better app, because I can't even do podcasts on the Audible app, and that's the only thing on this tablet, because it works so poorly that I don't dare put anything else on this tablet but Audible. And as few books from my Audible library, only the ones I'm currently listening to. So that is a disappointment and a complaint that you might hear from me. again because it's so annoying. But I do listen to Psalms and Proverbs for commuters. I've already talked about that. This is a daily listen that rotates on a monthly basis, and I'm currently going in chronological order through the Hebrew Bible, and so that's a morning listen as well. And then I decided to listen to the life and works of Jane Austen, which is part of the great courses on Audible. So it's not strictly a book. Again, it's a books adjacent lecture series essentially, and it's the teacher is Devony Lucer from Arizona State University, and I'm on lesson 9. I think I just finished lesson 9 yesterday, and it is very good. I am really enjoying it. She's right now, like yesterday, she analyzed the novel Persuasion. She's going through them in kind of in the order that they were written or published. I'm not sure, but she does really good analyses of each book, and even she went through Juvenilia, and she gave in the first lesson she told a little about her life, and she still inserts things about Jane's life that affected, that appear to have affected her choices in her writings. So I'm finding that a very good listen. All right, then on my computer cart is where I call these like my brain tools or my brain exercises, and I've talked about them before, but this is a daily reading. This is called Switch on Your Brain Every Day by Dr. Caroline Leaf, and she wrote a book called Switch on Your Brain. And so this came out of that, and it has daily readings that include a Bible verse. And so the most recent one I did was she was talking about Ephesians 6:12, and with each day she puts a brainy tip, and this one said, we can never let down our guard when it comes to our thinking. And this is so true. We really need to guard our thoughts, because this helps our mindset, and it helps us to live proactively. And this is part of how I've lost 295 pounds, is learning what I can from Dr. Leaf and others. And so it's very helpful. And this is why I try to work on my brain all the time, because your actions come from your thoughts, and your habits come from your thoughts. Everything you do or say start in your thought life. And so it's very important. She does the little discussions in there, and then when I study the verse or the passage in Hebrew or Greek, and I try to get as much of that from that as I can, and then on her discussion underneath the brainy tip, I try to kind of paraphrase and personalize that and write it down again, all these pathways to my brain. And I thought this part was really good on that. She said, so again, she writes in the third person more, but I'm writing in the first person, and copying some of it down for my notes. It is foolhardy to believe that I can live my life however I choose. And when problems arise, just sit back and ask Yehovah, why is this happening to me? And tell everyone I am under spiritual attack. I am always under attack on every front, spiritually speaking. Shaul, or Paul, says we are in a war, not going to war. Paul is the author of Ephesians. And it is a war to win over my mind and my life. So that's why I have to be proactive about that, because and for those that are spiritually minded, you can think about it in that way. The battlefield is your mind. Someone wrote a book with that title. The battlefield is the mind. And so it's really important for spiritual warfare. And even if you're not spiritually inclined and you're more scientifically inclined, that's where Dr. Caroline Leaf comes in, because she has all the science behind how our brains work and how we can control our thoughts. And so it's beneficial to anyone, whether you have are a person of faith or not. So I really like that. And I talked to you before about my mom, what I call the mom book, where my kids want me to write my life story, and it has prompts in here for to get you to talking about your memories and things. And so my latest one was I only do one question at a time because I get kind of overwhelmed otherwise. So the latest one was, what were your favorite classes in school? And so it had space for 5, and I wrote down language arts / English / literature, number 2 math, number 3 business, number 4 music, chorus and band, and number 5 history. I think after I wrote all this down, I think history is higher than some of those. It might even be higher than math, but I loved math, so we'll see. As I grow, I continue to grow and change. You never know. And then my other brain exercise is logic puzzles. And so I try to do these on a regular basis. And the latest one I'm doing is a whodunit. And you have to solve the first 4 puzzles. And I put all my answers to the first 4 puzzles here in order to solve the 5th one. So now I'm working on the 5th one. And I find these, really, so I'm trying to utilize all parts of my brain as I use these tools. And the other thing that I put in this category is my colored pencils and my sketchbook. So I want to use I want to nurture the creative part of my brain. I've never thought of myself as an artist, but I admire art and artists a lot. And I figure the only way I can I'm going to force myself to do it, even though I think I suck. But I try not to tell myself that. I'm trying to be positive reinforcement, and just do it anyway. And so the most recent one I did was just this little sketch right here. And I'm not demanding of myself. And this was on my brain, and I just kind of, my memory of it, I put it on paper because I did not have my needlework portion of this in sight when I decided to recreate it on paper. But this is what I've been working on lately. And the design is by Teresa Kogut, and it does say create every day on it. It has other images on it as well, but I like that sentiment, or to create every day. And so that's part of why I force myself to do sketches and just do it anyway. And my previous one I like better. I still need a lot of work on perspective and stuff, but I was crocheting succulent coaster set at the time, so I thought, well, maybe I could draw a succulent. So that was what I did. So I encourage anybody, don't think you can't do it, because the more you do it, that's what I hear from artists. The more you do it, the better you get at it. And I try to watch artists and listen to what they say and read. I try to find books, and I'm hoping to get to some of those soon. But yeah, that sits on my computer cart on a shelf under my laptop, and those items, and I try to work through those and do something from that shelf every day. All right, and then I have my red fire. And on my red fire, that's where I have to put other things like Libby and Kindle books and PDF books and things like that. So currently on the red fire is Cupid's Poisoned Arrow, and I've talked about that before. I'm getting really close to the end of that book, and it's definitely adult reading, and it's about pair bonding as opposed to mammal brain mating behaviors. They both involve physical contact between two people, and there's a lot of science behind this and a lot of history behind it as well that the author Robinson talks about. And so basically what's the practice is called Carezza, and I'll try to print it on the screen here to spell it. And basically what they found scientifically is when we indulge in mating behaviors that involve I'm just going to say the big O, we then have about a 2-week cycle of kind of aversion to the partner, and there's like a distancing that takes place between partners, and this chips away at the intimacy and the longevity of relationships. So so the thrust of the book is that you want to focus on the bonding behaviors that do not have that feature, that promote intimacy on an ongoing basis and doesn't devolve into this separation, because our genes just want to reproduce themselves, and so we're driven by that. And so this is kind of like a higher level to promote pair bonding in a way that safeguards the relationship instead of causing us to go through this separation cycle over and over and over again. So it all makes sense when you read it. I probably don't do a good job of describing it, but if you are in a relationship or want to be in a relationship, it would be a good book to read to get the science of how we bond with each other. And so that's a good one. And let's see. Oh yeah, the other thing, I just got Void Moon, which is the next Connelly book, so I'll be starting that one. I have The Cruelest Month, which is the third Gamache book. I have that on hold on Libby. And the other thing I got from chronologia.org, and I love these things. I love this kind of thing. What it is it's about the new, they're calling it a new science called the new chronology, and I'll get into more of that in a minute. But this particular one was just a short book, and let me give a warning about the website. It has little flags along the top of the page, and you can click on the Union Jack for English, and you will get some things, you'll get English, but some of the downloadable books, I noticed parts of them were not clickable download PDFs. And I found that when my browser, and I use Brave browser, it would do a drop down when I would go to the website, and the website, the original language of the website is Russian, and it'll have a little box up there for me to choose Russian or English, and if I put it on English, maybe it's the browser that translates the page, maybe it's Google Translate, I don't know, But I had much better luck doing that and being able to download these books and parts of books in English. And it's not the greatest English translations, but I can get the gist of it. And so on the front page of chronologia.org was a book called The Other Colonization of America. And I can't pronounce the author's name, and I think it's under 100 pages in PDF form. And but definitely the best thing about it is the maps, the old maps. And I put them on my Red Fire because then I can view that PDF in color, and I could see these beautiful maps. And the main theme of the book is that the official narrative is that Castile is the primary Spanish presence in the New World, or was, and he challenges that with evidence not only from the cartography but other things, that Catalan was the more primary, than Castile, and even the Ottoman Empire had claimed territory in the New World. So, and of course Portugal, and so he goes all over that. And somebody who actually knows Spanish history, because I hardly know any at all, this will be much more intriguing to someone who actually knows, has a background, that they've learned some Spanish history, to know all of these factions and things. And so that's why I'm getting the most out of the maps. Also, the foreword is by Anatoly Fomenko, and he's the primary author featured on chronologia.org, and I'll be talking about his books in a minute. But and so the author of this, The Other Colonization of America, he refers to Fomenko and Fomenko's work in establishing the new chronology. So that's what's on the Red Fire, and on the old Kindle, on my old Kindle, which looks like this with the keyboard and the push buttons. On that one, I am reading the Encyclopedia of Lost and Rejected Scriptures. I've gotten to the Apocrypha. I'm about high 60s% into it, and I'm on Second Esdras, which is also for Ezra 4, and it's very parallel to the time, the biblical books of Ezra and Nehemiah. So it's very good. I'm really liking that. I read about a chapter a day, and then the second thing on my old Kindle is I had downloaded in the past. I read Fomenko's book, his big 7-volume set that's called. It looks like this, and it's called History, Fiction, or Science. And thankfully my library has volume 1, and I read this a few years ago. And then I found the website and I downloaded the first section of volume 2. So that was already on my old Kindle from a few years ago. So I decided I learned about the Historathon, and I thought, well, Fomenko's books cover all of history, and since I didn't get in on the Historathon at the beginning of the year, I figure I'm going to go ahead and start reading that. So I started reading volume 2, and it's covering so far the parallels between the Second Roman Empire, what Fomenko refers to as the Second Roman Empire and the Third Roman Empire, and makes the case that they are the same. Fomenko is a mathematician that specializes in statistics and empirico-statistical analysis, I think it's what it's called. And he and his colleagues, mostly mathematicians and physicists, they have studied all of this since 1973, and the background is so fascinating. But in volume 2, he's covering this in the beginning, and the odds of there being so many exact matches of reign lengths, lifespans, wars that happened in certain locations, and so it appears that what happened in the Middle Ages, well, maybe, I don't know, I think it was in the 1500s, that these narratives were created and duplicated and then set in the past. So in this case, it's about they take what happened, like with Constantine, and they give him a new name and put it 330 years in the past, so that I can't remember who the parallel to Constantine is. I don't remember which Caesar, but he has all kinds of tables and graphs that show this in a mathematical way, and it is just fascinating. So I'm loving that. On the new Kindle, which is charging at the moment, this is just the newer one with the touch screen. It is, what I'm reading on here is The South Was Right. And again, that is filled with, of course, these authors, both of them, they're brothers named Kennedy. They are, of course, Southern background, and so they are presenting the history from the Southern point of view. And I have learned so much that I had to write down some of it because I can't remember it all, but a lot of things that I never knew. And they make the case in the chapters I've been reading lately about nullification and secession being accepted parts of the founding documents and the society in the latter 18th century and early 19th century. And so they show that this happened more repeatedly during that time frame, and nobody went to war, nobody did all this stuff, and so it wasn't some unique thing that the southern states did in 1860 or 61. It wasn't anything new. So one of those things is in 1784, I'd never heard of this. I thought this was amazing. And the whole idea of state sovereignty was well established, and it was so well established that in 1784, during the Continental Congress, and I don't think it was at the meetings or whatever, I'm not sure what caused it, I can't remember, but New York and Vermont almost went to war against each other. Now, if they were part of the same country, that, and what further underscores that these were sovereign states is that Massachusetts, well, not only did, I can't remember which one, whether it was New York or Vermont, but one of them issued, a statement that if any of you other states, you better stay out of it and pledge neutrality, or we'll take you down too. We'll go to war against you too. So Massachusetts immediately passed a resolution of their neutrality between the hostilities between New York and Vermont. So this goes to show that state sovereignty was definitely a practice at the time. And before that, I think it was before that, but the Treaty of Paris that officially ended the war between Great Britain and the United States it delineates, it lists each separate state as a nation. So all 13 colonies, Great Britain recognized them as sovereign states in the Treaty of Paris that officially ended the hostilities, and it even referred to itself as the state of Great Britain. So the state of Georgia, the state of New York, and then finally the state of Great Britain says this. So state sovereignty was well established early on. Another thing I learned is that there was a lot more they allege that Jim Crow laws started in the North, and I remember one of them was Illinois, and this might have even been pre-war. I can't remember if it was pre-1861 or after, but Illinois had a law that quote, free Negroes, unquote, are not allowed in the state longer than 10 days. If they're in the state longer than 10 days, they're subject to arrest and incarceration because they did not want them living there. And this, and there were other states with laws like this. And it wasn't just black people, Indians, anybody non-white. They did not want, like cities would have that in their laws, that they could not travel through the city, or they couldn't reside there, or whatever. So a lot of these were there, and so this. And then another thing that surprised me is that abolitionists. There are abolitionists quoted in this book that they are against slavery because they were against the importation of Africans into the country. They did not want Africans in the country. So that was the source of their anti-slavery views and practices. That was what motivated them. And another kind of, also West Point. There was a textbook that was used at West Point and other places called Constitutional Law. Raleigh, I think, was the author's name, but it goes all into how secession is, it was an accepted practice. I mean, even though it had only been threatened, I guess, up to that point, but the author of this constitutional law book, he lays out the case for how it is lawful to secede from the that the founding documents make that clear, that it's not an indivisible union. And as the authors of The South was right, they say only empires are indivisible, which kind of leads to the Pledge of Allegiance. I didn't know that was written by a socialist, and apparently his daughter later on advocated for the under God phrase to be put in there. So maybe I don't know, maybe she didn't wholly subscribe to the viewpoint of her father. And another thing I didn't know about the Pledge of Allegiance is that up until 1942, when this was instituted in schools, the children, there are photos in the book of children doing the Pledge of Allegiance with a stiff-armed Roman salute. And then it was not until 1942 that it became, so they had their arms up in the air like this. And in 1942 they changed it to the hand over the heart. I didn't know any of that, so I found that interesting. And then I learned about nullification, which is when a sovereign state in a agreement like we had in the early days between the 13 sovereign states that entered into an agreement, and did the monarchists and the federalists didn't win. And I didn't know that. I didn't know John Adams was a monarchist, and Alexander Hamilton, and I knew they were Federalists, but I guess prior to that they were monarchists. But that got shot down pretty quickly, and so this whole, what the authors call the supreme federal government, didn't exist yet. And although there were those trying to establish it, but nullification was a common practice pre-1861, where a state did not, chose not to follow a law passed by the federal government. And that was clear with the Fugitive Slave Act, when states would not return the escaped slaves to their masters. So it was okay to nullify in that case. And today we have, when I was learning about nullification, I always thought of nullification as jury nullification in, court trials. But there's this broader definition of it. And I thought right away, well, we have that today because there are states that make cannabis legal when the federal government has not made it legal. So they're standing against the federal government in that, when they won't prosecute people for cannabis. So I found that all interesting. So that's what I've been learning in that book, and so I've still got a ways to go in that book, because I try to absorb all this, and but there's just so many facts in there. There's so many documents and things like that. So it's hard for me to memorize it all. That's why I wrote all these down, because I thought, oh man. All right, so we'll move on, and I'm doing another really long video. Oh well, I guess that's the way I do it, because I read a lot of books. On the nightstand, this is when I read physical books generally, and I've already referred to this one, history, fiction, or science, and I've talked about Anatoly Fomenko, the author, and I mean, this is a big book. And it is, double columned, small print. It's awesome, though. And I thought this was a good way to describe. This is from a foreword by Alexander Zinoviev, and he says the general narrative scheme they employ, meaning the authors, is as follows. The authors relate the consensual, in parentheses, school textbook, historical concepts, and then cite historical facts which either fail to concur to said concepts or contradict them explicitly. Other authors who have noticed these inconsistencies are quoted. Then Fomenko and Nosovsky put forth hypotheses which allow to find logically correct solutions for the problems under study. They keep on emphasizing and reiterating that the issue at hand is all about hypotheses and not categorical statements presented as the truth absolute. The readers are invited to take part in the solution of problems that arise as a consequence of the consensual chronological concept of history. So that's basically what you have here. And what got Fomenko started was the work of Robert Newton, an American astronomer, who found lunar eclipses that did not match the D parameter, and it's D with two little jots after it, so I'm not sure what scientific nomenclature that is. So I'm just going to say D parameter of lunar motion. And Newton was having problems resolving this, and Fomenko came across this, and he tested everything that Newton did, and he found that Newton's calculations were all perfect. correct. Newton hadn't done anything wrong. And Newton this is all the way back in 1973. And Newton, the only resolution he could come up with is maybe there were some extra gravitational forces because there were these eclipses that couldn't have been like in the 5th century BC. When Fomenko and his colleagues decided to try to resolve this, try to figure this out, they found that these eclipses, and Thucydides is referred to, and it's supposed to be in the 5th century BC, but it could only have happened, these heavenly events, these astronomical events, could have only happened in the 11th or 12th century if you follow this D parameter of lunar motion. And so it's just fascinating. And in this book, volume 1, I remember from reading it the first time that he covers the history that we have comes from Scaliger, and his apprentice, I guess you would call him, Petavius. And this was, I think, in the 16th century when they made these historical chronicles. And Fomenko is not the first, he's not the first one to try to resolve these historical inconsistencies. Isaac Newton wrote a book challenging the historical narrative. I have that book on Kindle, so I want to finish these 7 volumes if I can, and then I'll try him. Also, somebody named Morozov, and it seems like there was one other, but I think Morozov was from about 100 or more years ago. And so there are predecessors to Fomenko, and in challenging the historical narrative. And if I recall correctly, in this book, I'm still reading the preface. But it's filled with illustrations and all kinds of interesting things, like upside down maps, and so. I remember from reading it the first time, I learned a lot of history, not just the problems of history, but a lot of history in general, and I found it wonderful. So that's why I want to read the whole series, and that's why I'm rereading it again, so there's just so much more to our past than I ever knew, and but if I recall correctly, in this book he talks about dating methods in archaeology and the problems with them. I hope I'm remembering correctly, that carbon dating, they won't even accept a sample, an artifact, unless the archaeologist gives them a date that he or she thinks it is from. And the process itself can be off by 2,000 or more years. So I found that interesting, and so that's going to be fun going through that. So I'm kind of reading volume 1 and volume 2 at the same time. And then my other nightstand book is Saint. Let me put it here. Saint by Adrienne Young, and I'm getting pretty far. So I'm about 2/3, I think. And I think this is a prequel to a series that starts with Fable. And I shouldn't put this in front of my mouth, I guess. And I did see that Libby has Fable, so I'll probably go right from Saint to Fable, because I'm really liking Saint and all the seafaring life going on there. I'm also still going through the Beginner's Guide to the Doll's House Hobby, learning all about building dolls' houses. I'm getting close to the end here. And it's too fiddly of a hobby for me, too much glue and paint and messy things, and I don't think I'll ever do it. But I am learning about miniatures in general here, and but when I'm done with this, I'm going to take it to the little free library in town, and when I go, I'm going to film it because it's absolutely adorable, the little free library. So I'll try to get some footage of that for you. But hopefully somebody who wants to do this can learn from this. And because the one I want to do is a plastic canvas wonder called the Fashion Doll Dream Castle. And I will be making this out of plastic canvas and yarn. And so this, when I finish that book, I'll be reading all of this to study and all the architecture of it. But this is what the backside looks like, with the rooms and the furniture all made out of plastic canvas. And here's another picture of the front that's bigger. So it's Barbie sized. So yeah, I'm going to study and see what I got ahead of me for that. And so that's that. And in August, one of my planned reads is Alaska by James Michener. And there we go. I've had this sitting around for a long time, and I noticed that Ariane at Book Zealots this was in her stack of books that she was hoping to get to in August. So I said, well, I'll read it with you because I have it, and I found it. Yay! All right, that's it. Under an hour. Yay! So that's BookTube 2, and thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.